many of you pray? Raise your hands if you pray. How many of you expect results? A little different question. Well, a rabbit hopped right in front of the car, and the driver could not help but hit him. And being a sensitive man and an animal lover, the driver got off to check the rabbit and found to his dismay that he had killed him. Well, a woman stopped and asked what was wrong, and he said, well, I accidentally hit this rabbit and I've killed him. The woman said not to worry. She went back to her car, got a can of spray, came and sprayed the dead rabbit, and immediately it jumped up and hopped off, turned and waved its paw. Hopped a little further, turned and waved its paw. Hopped a little further, stopped, turned, and waved its paw until it was out of sight. And the man was astonished. He said, what did you put in that can? So the woman showed him the label, and it read, hairspray restores life to dead hair. To pray that my hard drive crashed. Well, Peter, not Peter Rabbit, but Peter also got results. You want answered prayer? In the lesson, in the passage preceding the lesson read, Peter healed a paralyzed man who had been bedridden for 8 years. Then in the lesson we just heard read, Peter was called to Joppa, which is called Jaffa today. Tabitha, a beloved saint and seamstress of the church, had died. Tabitha in Aramaic, which was the common language spoken that day, Jesus spoke Aramaic, is Dorcas in Greek, and is gazelle in English. A small, swift, graceful antelope with lustrous, soft eyes. What a lovely name. Tabitha. Or gazelle. Well, she died. A number of widows were there. And isn't it interesting that the church, even in its earliest days, had a sizable number of widows in the congregation. The widows were weeping, and then they showed Peter some of the clothing that Tabitha had sewed. And Peter asked them to leave the room, and Peter knelt down and prayed. Now, you want answered prayer? Talk about faith. With faith. Without any sign that his prayer had been heard, without any sign at all that his prayer was to be answered, he acted in faith. Now that's faith. He said, Tabitha, get up. He acted on his prayer. Tabitha opened her eyes, sat up, and Peter helped her stand. And the incident is reminiscent of Luke chapter 8, where Jesus was called to the home of a Roman named Jairus, whose 12-year-old daughter had died. And Jesus asked the family and the professional mourners to leave the room. And Jesus prayed, and in faith said, child, get up. And the child lived. Talk about answered prayer. You want answered prayer? Dr. Larry Dorsey, the author of a book on prayer and medicine called Healing Words, takes the power of prayer very seriously. He began to pray for patients when he decided that withholding prayer was the equivalent of refusing to use a potent drug or a surgical procedure. So he prays for his patients. And he reports that a simple attitude of prayer seems to set the stage for healing. He cites research studies that show lower blood pressure, slower heart rate, and lower metabolic rates as a result of prayer. lowers the need of heart patients for antibiotics. And prayerful attitudes precede the spontaneous regressions of cancer. You want answered prayer? In the summer of 1876, grasshoppers nearly destroyed the crops in Minnesota. And when the spring of 1877 dawned, the farmers were worried. They feared that again the grasshoppers would destroy the rich wheat crop. The situation was so desperate that Governor John S. Pillsbury proclaimed April 26th as a day of prayer and fasting. He urged every man, woman, and child to pray that God would deliver them, would prevent the terrible plague. So on that April day, all the schools, offices, stores, and shops were closed, and a reverent hush, a quiet hush was felt over all the state as they prayed. The next day, dawned bright and clear. Temperatures soared to what they ordinarily were in midsummer, and the people were devastated as they discovered billions of grasshopper larvae wiggling to life. On the fourth day, however, the temperature dropped and frost covered the earth, and the frost killed every one of those creeping, crawling pests. Talk about answered prayer. Well, we got a call one day from Wanda, a young school teacher in Illinois, a former parishioner of ours back then, and a longtime friend. And Wanda had been experiencing severe migraine headaches. She went from doctor to doctor, and they all told her they were in her head. They even sent her to a psychiatrist. And she told the psychiatrist, I know the headaches are in my head. But I know I am not creating them, nor am I imagining them. Well, finally, a neurologist discovered a tumor on her brain and scheduled surgery. Well, Wanda asked to be put on prayer lists. And then the call went out all over the country, and people all over began to pray for Wanda. The day before the surgery, she experienced terrible pain. And she said, if someone were in her head with scissors, cut it. And the next day, the surgeons opened her head and lifted out the tumor. All of the tentacles were loose. And Wanda said, Dr. Jesus cut the tumor loose. Today, some 20 years later, Wanda is doing fine. Talk about answered prayer. You want answered prayer? What I believe happens when we pray for someone or some situation, as we pray every Sunday in church, as we prayed this morning, when we pray as a congregation, what I believe happens is that the Holy Spirit gathers our prayers, gathers our energy, gathers our spirit, and combines them all into a force of healing power. God can do more when we let God use us, when we cooperate with God, We don't have to use words. Just focus on the person or the situation. Image the light of God shining, and let God do the work. Now, when you do use words to pray for someone, follow Paul's model in his letter to the Colossians. Of course, you want to pray for your children or your grandchildren. But what do you pray for? When you pray for someone, what do you pray for? What do you ask for? Well, when you pray for your children, or your spouse, or your pastors, or your church, or friends, or neighbors, or when you pray for people you don't even know, but they've asked for prayer, use Colossians chapter 1, 9-12 as a model. and pray for 6 results. Pray for 6 results. Number 1, pray that they know God's will for their lives. Colossians chapter 1, verse 9, Paul wrote, "We have not ceased praying for you and asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding." Secondly, pray that they would do God's will in their lives. Verse 10, Paul prayed, "So that you may lead lives worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him." Now, knowing and doing are 2 different things. Knowing God's will and doing God's will is the prayer. Only through action do people fulfill God's purpose for their lives. Third, pray for productivity in their lives. Continuing in verse 10, Paul prays, "Bear fruit in every good work." Bear fruit. Pray that they may know God's will, do God's will, and be productive. 4, pray for them to have a growing relationship with God. Verse 10, Paul prays, "Grow in the knowledge of God." Grow. Someone said happiness is growth. Well, the reverse is equally true. Stagnation is unhappiness. 5, pray for power. For power. Verse 11, "May you be made strong with all the strength that comes from His glorious power, and may you be prepared to endure everything with patience." None of us can make it on our own strength or our own endurance. None of us. Pray for power. And 6, last, pray for them to have a right attitude. Continuing at verse 11 and then verse 12. "While joyfully giving thanks to the Father who has enabled you to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light." Pray for a joyful attitude, an attitude of gratitude. Now, by the way, praying for these 6 results for yourself is also not a bad idea. For yourself, pray that you may know God's will, do God's will, be productive, grow in your relationship with God, experience God's power, and have the right attitude of joy and thanksgiving, gratitude. You want answered prayer? Well, pray and believe.